I'm Chef Richard Miller. Welcome to Chef Richard's Kitchen. Today we're going to be making a Mexican dish, and this is one of my favorite of Mexican foods, which is one of my favorite foods anyway. And it's Chile Colorado, and you'll often hear it as chile con carne, or just plain old in the Spanish interpretation, chiles with meat. And that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to do this in two sections. We're going to actually start it out with processing the chiles. And I'm using 4 ancho and about 4 guajillo chiles in here. And we're going to process these, and we're going to make a sauce out of them. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to brown our beef, and we're going to put them all together and let them simmer for a while until the meat's extremely tender and the sauce is reduced, and it's going to come out absolutely delicious. Now, when we get started, there are 2 ways of looking at the chiles. And a lot of people, if you watch their videos that make very, very good Colorado, they take and destem their chiles and put them in the water, and then they boil them, simmer them until they're very pliable. The other way of doing that is the way I prefer, and you give your chiles a whole different taste or a whole different level of complexity if you toast them for just a slight amount of time. Now here's where you have to be careful. The last time I was filming this episode, I left them in the oven too long, and I burnt my chiles. So today, I've done it before, I've done it many times, and they've come out beautiful. That time I just happened to burn them. But we're going to put them in a 350 degree oven, and we're just going to let them sit there for a minute, maybe 2, and no more. That's just enough to toast them a little bit and give that extra layer of flavor that we want. So let me go ahead and put these in the oven. I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. Now, while that's going ahead and while that's cooking, I've taken and I've cut up our beef already. And what this is it's just plain chuck. It's not a tender cut of meat at all. Chuck is often what you make pot roast out of. It's what you cut up for stew beef. And that works out very, very well here. And the reason is because by the time we simmer this sauce and the meat together to get the flavors to meld well, the meat is so tender it'll fall apart in your mouth. If you use a more expensive cut, which is more tender, it's just going to turn flabby. So use the chuck, a top round or something like that, but don't use any of the expensive cuts. Use one of the less cheaper, like you'd cook for a long, long time. We're also going to take, and here's my ingredient list. We've got a couple of pounds of cut up beef, and I cut it up into about 1 to 1.5 inch cubes, something like that. You cut them any finer than that, they're going to mush up on you. This will turn out very well. We have a small onion. We have about 3 tablespoons of flour, and we're going to put those in, right as we get ready to brown the beef. My timer's about ready to go off on the oven here. Excellent. This time they're worthy of cooking. All right, we have our flour. We'll put that in with our beef. That does 2 things. When we brown our beef, that kind of cooks the flour taste out of it. Number 2 is when we put the sauce back in here, it acts as a natural thickener. I've got a couple of medium-sized bay leaves, some kosher salt, I probably got a couple teaspoons in here, and I'm not going to give an exact because I want to go ahead and I want to season this later. And one thing I recommend on this dish is we're going to be cooking it down. And if we season this and we put our salt in there to taste good when it's extremely wet and voluminous, by the time we get it cooked down to where we want it, it's probably going to be too salty. And you know how I am with salt. You always think of your guest first, and people that are on salt-restricted diets, go easy on the salt and let them use the salt shaker on the table if they need more. Don't make it drab by any stretch of the imagination, but make sure that you're friendly to your guest, and that's who you should think about most. I have about a tablespoon or so of cornstarch, and what this is going to be is, I don't know if I'm going to need it or not, but if I do, I'm going to take and put another teaspoon of water in there, and I'm going to make a slurry, and we're going to put that into our sauce and our beef, and we can thicken it a little more if needed. Usually I don't need to. Usually the flour does fine, but if we need a little bit more, we have it. I have a couple of teaspoons of oregano, and I tend to use the Mexican oregano as it does have a different flavor than the Turkish oregano. And if you're going to make authentic Mexican food, use the Mexican. It does have a much, much better flavor. I actually tend to use that in most all of my cooking, just simply because I think it has a much richer, much better flavor. We have about a teaspoon and a half of smoked paprika, about a teaspoon and a half of ground cumin, or if you're going to one of your Latin grocers, it's just going to be called cumino. I have half of a jalapeno that's been seeded and deveined and chopped, about 3 cloves of garlic that I've minced, and about a teaspoon of garlic powder. Now, with all this garlic powder, I'm not going to use all of the garlic in here. In fact, I'm going to use the minced garlic first, and I have this, just simply in case I need a little more garlic. But this isn't going to be my main go-to. My minced garlic is. All right, now let's go back over to the stove again. All right, and here we have our roasted chilies. All right, as you can see, it's a pretty good looking chili. And we're going to take these and we're going to put them in a saucepan. All right. I'm going to put in probably a cup or so of chicken broth. Probably about a cup and a half of water. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of my spices in here. I'm going to put my garlic in here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to let this come to a boil. And when we let it come to a boil, we're going to turn the heat down. We're going to put a lid on there, and we're going to let it simmer for a while. We're going to let it simmer, probably 15, 20 minutes, something like that, until the chilies are very, very moist and tender, and then we're going to process them in the blender. So this will take a little while. If you want, this is a good time to take a little break. We'll be back in a few minutes, so go ahead, take a break, don't go far. Now that our water has come to a boil over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to put in some of our onions, and my recipe calls for one small onion. I'm not sure I'm going to use all of it. I'm going to put some of it in here, and then if we need a little bit more, I'll go ahead and I'll put it in while it's in the blender, and we'll blend it in that way. But for right now, you can see that the water is boiling here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put some of my onion in. All right. Bring this back to a boil. You can see how those chilies are getting very, very pliable and tender right now. And that's exactly how we want them, because we're going to put them in the blender and we're going to puree this, and we want them tender. Now, there's a couple of ways to do that, and I'll show you when we get there. You can either go ahead and leave or if you want a little smoother sauce, you can go ahead and strain it. I wait to see what it is. I kind of like a little, not quite so smooth. I still like a few little, like chili pieces in there, but I don't want it to look like it's just come out of here and been chopped either. All right, here we are right now. It's boiling. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn the heat down to a simmer, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put a lid on it, and we're just going to let it simmer until everything is nice and tender. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to puree it. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes now, and our chiles are extremely tender. Now it's time, let's go ahead and process them. Let me turn off the heat here. I'm going to take our chilies and our onion, and put them in the blender. All right. Now, since I'm not going to be able to puree it without a little of the stock, I'm going to go ahead and lay a little bit of this in. And now let's go ahead and puree it. That looks nice, smells good. I'm remember to taste it. Actually tastes pretty good. But now we have to remember our other spices. Our cumin, our smoked paprika, oregano, and our jalapenos. Alright, now it's time to add the rest of our beef stock, or in this case chicken stock. That has an excellent flavor. An excellent flavor, it's a good consistency. Now let's go to work and let's brown our beef. Alright, here we have a good sized pan. Let's go ahead and let's get the bottom of this reasonably hot. I'm going to put in a little bit of oil. Now let's wait a minute for this to go ahead and get warm. Okay, now it's reasonably hot. Let's go ahead and let's put some of our beef in here to brown. Now, we don't want to put too much in here because we don't want to steam it. We want to brown it. So let's go ahead and let's put, maybe half of it in. And if you go to push it right away around, you're going to find out that it's sticking. Leave it in there. Let it brown for a minute. It'll come loose. All right, now that it's browning, let's go ahead and take our first batch out. and put our second batch in. Now while this batch heats, after it's brown, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the rest of the flour in here, and then put the meat back in here. Then we'll be ready to put our chili sauce in here. And then while this stews down, then let's go ahead and let's make a pico de gallo and a guacamole. All right, I'm going to put a few more onions in. And let's go ahead and let's brown them up while we're at it. I know you can't see into the bottom of the pan from this camera, but if you could, you'd see a lot of this nice brown fond, or what we call the brown bits, in the bottom of this. And what we're going to do is, when we put our chili sauce in here, we're going to make sure we scrape all that up, because there's a lot of flavor in there that we just don't want to lose. Okay, the meat's getting brown. The onions are pretty much translucent. Let's go ahead and put our first batch of beef in there. Even the liquid that drained off the first batch of beef is getting that fond off the bottom. Let's put the flour in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to stir this, and we're going to cook this, because unless we cook it, it's going to have that flour taste, and that we don't want. We want the flour to be used as a thickener, not as a seasoning. All right? Now, if you can see this with the camera, you can see that everything's pretty much incorporated in here. Now, it's time to go ahead and add our sauce. All right, now one thing you're going to notice is it's still a little runny, and that's okay, because it'll thicken up. Remember, with flour or cornstarch or any other thickener, it won't thicken until it boils. So we're going to have to boil it again, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn the temperature down, and we're going to let it simmer. And we're going to let it simmer for about an hour or so until the meat is very, very tender. Now, while we're waiting, go ahead and put in our 2 bay leaves. We'll take those out later. All right. One last thing to do. Very good. Very good. It's spicy, but not real spicy. It has a little kick, but not enough to knock you over. I'm going to add a little salt. A little pepper. That makes all the difference in the world. It still might need a little more salt, but remember what I said, that we want to make sure that after this reduces, we don't want to concentrate the salt too much, because then we have problems too. So let's get this to boil, then we'll turn the heat down and we're going to let it simmer. Right now I can feel down at the bottom, and where all that fond was on the bottom, you can definitely tell it's gone now. And that's all flavor in our food. Okay, now you can see that we've really got a good boil here. So let's go ahead and let's turn this down, turn the heat down, and we're going to just go ahead and we're going to let it simmer. And we're going to let it simmer for between an hour and an hour and a half. And in this time, the meat's going to get tender, and then later on, after this is simmered, we're going to take the top off and we're going to let it boil down and condense a little bit. So we'll put our lid on. We're going to let it simmer. And we're going to let it simmer for an hour. So go ahead, take another break. Don't go far. We'll be right. While we wait for the Chile Colorado to go ahead and reduce a little bit and thicken up. What goes better with a little Chile Colorado, there's some pico de gallo, and a little guacamole. So let's go ahead and let's just make a little bit. Let's start with the avocado. As well as that. All right, let's go ahead and now let's scoop out our avocado such. The guacamoles that I found, or the avocados that I found in the market, were either way overripe or they were underripe. So I took the underripe ones just simply because I didn't want a lot of brown in there. So I'm not sure that was the right idea. All right, now we'll take a lime. And we'll put half a lime worth of juice in there. And here's where I think I'll use my potato masher. Now we'll put a little red onion in there. And I want to cut up a little tomato. And I usually take the seeds out of these. Some people like to, other people don't. To me, it's personal preference. And I tend to like a little jalapeno in there. Not a whole lot, but just a little. Now, The lime juice that we put in there actually serves a couple of purposes. First off, it actually brightens the flavor of it a little bit, as does some salt. Second of all, it prevents the avocados, or at least it slows down the oxidation process of it, so it doesn't turn brown nearly as quickly. All right. In my case, I like a little pepper in there too, so. All right. Now, let me get an onion here, and we'll make our pico de gallo. All right. All right. Now let's put some jalapenos in there. Some tomatoes. All right, let's put a little bit of lime in there as well. A little bit of salt. And let's chop up a little cilantro. In fact, I think I'll put a little of this in the guacamole as well. Now what you want to put it, what you like in these and what you want to put in is strictly your business. You know, make it how you want it. Make it how you like it. This is personally how I like guacamole and pico de gallo. If you like it a different way, for heaven's sakes, make it that way. Alright. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at how our Chile Colorado is doing, and we're about ready to plate. And I want to put a little I want to put some refried beans on there. A little lettuce. With a little pico de gallo. A little sour cream. Personally, I like the Mexican crema a little bit better. It's a little more mild, but I had sour cream. Okay, here's our Chile Colorado. Let's go ahead and put a little cilantro. And here's a garnish. Put just a little bit of lime. And here we have it. Now, the last thing we have to do is taste it to make sure you'd serve it to guests. The meat is extremely tender It melts in your mouth. The sauce is good. It's not too spicy. It's not bland. It just has the right balance of seasoning in there. I would be proud to serve this anytime as a guest. Now, of course, the one last thing that you always have to remember when you're making a Mexican dish like this, you always have to have tortillas. I just took the liberty of just putting them in the microwave to go ahead and soften and heat them. Go ahead and put them in the oven. Most of the time, they're wrapped in foil before they're served. But anyway, feel free to make this dish. The recipe, just write me at chefrdmiller@att.net, and I'll be more than happy to send you the recipe. Please go ahead and try this. You'll really like it. I certainly do. And thank you for watching this episode. Until next time, take care. God bless. Remember that cooking should always be fun. And we'll see you next episode. Thanks again for watching.